It started with a chuckle, a dismissive, drawn-out laugh that rolled through the late-night studio like a wave crashing into the dignity of a man who'd spent decades in public service. Carter Blake, the king of televised satire, leaned back in his chair, fingers laced behind his head, basking in the laughter of his live audience. "I mean, come on," he said, half laughing. "A guy who sounds like a high school football coach from the 1950s is lecturing us on economic theory. I don't know if I should take notes or ask for extra ketchup on my burger." The crowd erupted again. But in a quiet corner of the country, far from the applause and city lights, John Neely Kennedy was watching. His eyes, still as a pond at dawn, betrayed no anger, no smugness, just patience. Before we dive deeper, make sure to subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss the story of how a senator many underestimated turned a public mockery into an unforgettable moment of genius. Let's begin. John Neely Kennedy wasn't a man who craved the spotlight, though it had often found him. The native of Louisiana, his southern drawl had long made him a favorite target for comedians, pundits, and the all-knowing echo chamber of social media. But beneath that twang was a mind sharper than most knew, a mind shaped not just by years in politics, but by something older, quieter, and far more unexpected: mathematics. As a young man, Kennedy had studied at Vanderbilt, then Oxford. It was there, in the shadow of stone halls and endless blackboards, that he fell in love. Not with a person, but with numbers. Pure, unshakable, logical numbers. He would stay late in the libraries, working through theorems for the thrill of it, not because he had to. His mentor, Professor Mara Keene, once called him the most precise thinker I ever taught. But that side of Kennedy vanished from the public eye as politics claimed more of his years. The scholar became the senator, equations gave way to legislation, and soon only a few remembered the brilliance that once burned quietly behind those calm eyes, which brings us back to the studio. Blake had pulled up a clip of Kennedy speaking during a Senate hearing. The senator had used a complex metaphor involving financial derivatives and statistical fallacies, concepts too dense for a soundbite. But the only thing Blake focused on was the way Kennedy said algorithm, stretching the syllables like molasses. "Man, I haven't heard math sound that slow since my grandma tried to program her VCR," Blake joked. The segment went viral overnight. Comments poured in. Memes were born. Kennedy math trended for 2 days straight. But here's the thing. While the world laughed, Kennedy didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself. He didn't issue a press release or call in favors from cable networks. Instead, he reached for a dusty notebook, one filled with scribbled formulas and ink-blotted attempts from years ago. At the center of one page was a problem circled in red, an unsolved proof in advanced mathematics that had haunted him since Oxford. He remembered Keene's words from decades past. "One day, if you ever want to prove them all wrong, solve this." That night, as the laughter echoed through the internet, Kennedy turned off the television. He flipped open his notebook, cracked his knuckles, and began to write. No more sound bites, no more metaphors, just math, and that was only the beginning. The first few nights were brutal. John Neely Kennedy sat alone in his study, under the glow of a solitary desk lamp, flipping through pages that felt more like memories than notes. His hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from the pressure of trying to remember a mind he hadn't fully used in decades. The problem was called Keene's conjecture, named after his old professor. It was an elegant and stubborn puzzle in the realm of discrete mathematics, unresolved, unsolved, untouched by all who had dared to approach it. Keene herself had once admitted it might never be solved. Kennedy, back then, had come close, but life, law, and politics had pulled him away. Now, older, out of practice, and facing the ridicule of millions, he tried to pick up where he left off. The math had changed, or rather he had. Equations that once spoke to him like old friends now looked like strangers. His initial attempts were filled with errors, tiny miscalculations that turned promising leads into dead ends. On the third night, he realized he'd spent hours chasing a solution to a sub-problem that had already been disproven a decade ago. His frustration didn't erupt. It simmered. Quietly, like a fire burning behind a closed door. He took breaks only to stretch or refill his mug with bitter black coffee. He refused outside help, not out of pride, but because this battle was personal. It wasn't about silencing Carter Blake. It wasn't even about proving the world wrong. It was about something much older, honoring the part of himself he'd buried for too long. Meanwhile, outside his study, the world moved on. The internet spun its jokes. Political analysts debated the senator's credentials. Late-night hosts piled on. A popular influencer posted a viral breakdown of Kennedy's algebra fail, complete with neon graphics and techno music. It racked up 5 million views in 2 days. The ridicule wasn't just digital. In D.C., a fellow senator jokingly gifted Kennedy a children's math workbook during a committee break. Cameras caught the exchange. Laughter echoed again. But Kennedy didn't react. He filed the workbook away, unopened. That same night, he returned to his notebook, flipping to a clean page. He wrote carefully, "Assume Gn holds for Nk, then prove for Nk+1. The heart of an induction proof." Basic, yes, but it was something. A start. The next day, during a quiet drive back from Capitol Hill, he called someone he hadn't spoken to in years. "Mara," he said, once she picked up, her voice cautious with time. "I need to ask about the conjecture." There was silence on the line, then a soft exhale. "You still thinking about that damn thing?" she asked, more amused than surprised. "I'm thinking about everything," he said. She paused, then replied, "You're 40 years too late, but maybe not too late altogether." Their conversation didn't last long, but it was enough. Mara didn't offer a solution. She offered something better. A reminder that truth, especially mathematical truth, wasn't bound by popularity or public opinion. It existed beyond ridicule, beyond time. Still, as days passed and Kennedy struggled to make headway, the doubt began to creep in. He kept hearing Carter Blake's laughter in his mind. It repeated like a loop, right when he hit a wall in the proof. Each time he erred, he imagined millions watching, laughing, waiting for him to fail again. And worst of all, he started to believe them. But then, on the 7th night, something shifted. Not a breakthrough, not yet. Just a single quiet realization. He hadn't given up. Turning point, discovery or training, first success, renewed determination. The change was imperceptible at first. Kennedy began waking up earlier, his mind already turning before his feet hit the ground. He approached the proof not like a student chasing a solution, but like a craftsman shaping wood, slowly, with respect for the material. He set new rules for himself. No distractions, no commentary, no television, just pages of formulas, long walks to clear his mind, and occasional phone calls with Mara Keene, who had agreed to serve as a quiet compass, not a guide, never a crutch. One morning, while reviewing an old proof about prime distributions, something clicked. It wasn't Keene's conjecture itself, but a pattern hidden in the margins of another theorem, long overlooked. He circled it, heart quickening, then tested it across different conditions. It held. Then he applied it to one of the conjecture's outer cases. It held again. It wasn't the full proof, not yet. But it was the first success, the first thread. He stayed up that night until dawn, reconstructing the logic backward. For the first time, Kennedy wasn't fighting the math. He was listening to it. And the math, in its silent rigor, was beginning to speak back. The next day, he called Mara again. "I think I found a symmetry," he said. "It's not in the assumptions, it's in the recurrence." Keene paused, then said carefully, "That's unexpected." "I know, but it fits." She asked him to send the work. She promised nothing, but 2 days later, her voice came through the line, slightly shaken. "It's not wrong." He laughed, not in triumph, but in disbelief. Not wrong in mathematics meant something rare. It meant promise. With that sliver of validation, Kennedy doubled down. He rearranged his entire schedule. His staff noticed, his aides whispered, but no one asked questions, not yet. To them, he was just immersed in some policy initiative, perhaps some obscure budget negotiation. But inside his house, a different kind of negotiation was unfolding, between past and present, between what he once was and who he had become. He dug through old notebooks, academic journals, lecture notes from the 70s. He printed out his equations and taped them to the walls of his study. He color-coded variables, highlighted failures, plotted assumptions across index cards. It wasn't obsession. It was discipline, reawakened and precise. As he moved further along the proof, the anxiety began to recede. The mockery, the laughter, they were still out there, but they no longer mattered. He remembered something Mara once told him: mathematics doesn't care who you are, either it holds or it doesn't. And now, piece by piece, it was beginning to hold. One night, as he sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by papers, he caught a glimpse of a pattern that bridged two seemingly unrelated steps. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it resolved a logical inconsistency that had haunted the conjecture for years. He checked it, then checked it again. Then he wept. Not loudly, not from emotion alone, but because he knew he was close. Closer than anyone had ever been. At sunrise, he stood by the window, bleary-eyed, gripping the edges of his desk, and for the first time in weeks, he whispered, "They don't know what's coming." It wasn't a boast. It was a promise. Not to the world, to himself. Carter Blake had no idea what was coming. His team had scheduled another segment, a sequel of sorts to the viral mockery. A fresh clip of Senator Kennedy speaking at a subcommittee hearing had surfaced, and Blake, sensing another ratings goldmine, couldn't resist. But just hours before taping, a news item began to circulate. At first it was obscure, an academic blog post referencing a surprising mathematical submission by an unlikely author. No details, no conclusions, just a whisper. By evening, whispers turned into questions. A respected journal in Europe had received a formal submission of a full proof to Keene's conjecture. The submission came from J.N. Kennedy. At first, most assumed it was someone else, a namesake, a prank. But then the abstract leaked, and it referenced methods Kennedy had cited decades earlier in published Oxford notes. Specialists began reading, fast. On social media, mathematicians broke ranks with the usual silence and began tweeting phrases like "astonishing" and "if this holds, it's historic." By morning, even critics began to pause. Kennedy, meanwhile, said nothing publicly, but his staff, confused by the flood of inquiries, reached out to Mara Keene. She responded with a single statement: "The submission is genuine." And it is, by all early accounts, correct. Carter Blake didn't backpedal. He doubled down. That night on live television, he opened with fire. "So apparently I need to issue a correction," he smirked. Turns out Senator Kennedy didn't just confuse an algorithm with a fruit stand. He's actually a secret math genius now. Next week, we'll find out he invented Wi-Fi. The laughter was automatic, but less explosive than before. Something had changed. Midway through the show, a producer handed Blake a folded note. His eyes narrowed as he read it, then widened, then froze. It was a message from Kennedy's office. The senator would appear, live if invited. Tonight. The room shifted. Cameras cut to commercial. 10 minutes later, Kennedy was seated across from Blake under the hot lights of a studio filled with silent tension. For the first time, Blake seemed unsure of himself. "Well, Senator," he began, trying for levity, "are you here to teach us all calculus?" Kennedy smiled. "No, sir, just thought I'd help clarify a few things." Blake chuckled nervously. "So this proof, you actually wrote it?" "I did. And people are saying it might be real." Kennedy tilted his head slightly. "I reckon that depends on whether you've read it." Blake fumbled. "I mean, I haven't." Kennedy nodded. "Most people haven't. But that's the thing about math. It doesn't care if you understand it. It either holds or it doesn't." Then calmly he produced a printed summary, 6 pages of distilled logic, written not for mathematicians but for the public. He handed a copy to Blake. "I figured you might appreciate the annotated version," he said. Blake took it, unsure whether to joke or read. The audience remained quiet, waiting. Kennedy looked out toward the cameras. "Everyone laughed," he said, "and that's fine. Humor has its place, but truth also has its place, and for me it was never about pride. It was about finishing what I started. He paused, his voice steady. I submitted the proof because I believe it's right, not because I need you to believe it. Blake opened the summary, scanning the first few lines. His smile faded slightly. Kennedy continued, I'm not here to win an argument. I'm here to remind folks that sometimes the story you think you know isn't the whole story. And with that, the studio fell completely silent. In the days that followed the broadcast, the world reacted with a mix of disbelief and awe. News outlets scrambled to cover the story. Headlines ranged from Senator shocks nation with math proof to John Neely Kennedy, from punchline to prodigy. But it wasn't just media chatter. Academic institutions began issuing formal statements. The European Mathematical Society confirmed the preliminary validity of the proof. A peer review process was initiated, expedited due to overwhelming scholarly interest. Mara Keene, usually reclusive, gave an interview to The Atlantic, describing the moment she realized the proof held. It was like watching a melody resolve after 40 years of dissonance, she said. He didn't just solve it, he completed it with grace. Kennedy, for his part, declined invitations to talk shows, award ceremonies, and international conferences. He returned quietly to his Senate duties, responding to praise with the same composure he'd shown amid ridicule. One morning, during a press briefing, a journalist asked what the moment meant to him. He paused, then answered, It means I finished something I started, that's all. The rest, that's noise. But the noise wouldn't fade so easily. University math departments around the country began using his annotated proof as teaching material. Students who had once shared memes now watched lecture clips explaining the methods Kennedy had used. Twitter threads shifted from mockery to admiration. Even Carter Blake, a week after the now legendary interview, opened his show with a different tone. You know, he said, sometimes we get it wrong, and when we do, we ought to say it. So to Senator Kennedy, if you're watching, I read the summary. I still don't understand half of it, but I understand this. I laughed at the wrong man. It wasn't an apology, not quite, but it was close enough. The real twist came weeks later, when Kennedy received an official invitation from Oxford to deliver a lecture. Not political, mathematical, a full-circle moment. He accepted, not out of pride, but for the students. The auditorium filled early that day. As he stepped to the podium, there was no fanfare, no dramatic music, just the quiet respect of hundreds of sharp minds waiting to learn. He opened with a line they'd remember for years. Mathematics is a patient friend. It waits for you even when you forget its voice. The room listened. By the end of the lecture, when he concluded with the final segment of the proof, the standing ovation wasn't polite, it was earned. Back in the States, a quiet ripple of cultural reflection began. Conversations about judging intellect by accent, dismissing people based on style, and overlooking quiet brilliance took root in classrooms, newsrooms, and living rooms. Kennedy, however, kept moving forward. One evening, while walking through a quiet corridor of the Capitol, a young staffer stopped him. "Senator, I just wanted to say, I switched my major to math because of you." Kennedy smiled gently. "Good. Don't do it for me. Do it because you love it." He kept walking. And maybe that was the real victory. Not solving a proof, not earning respect, not changing the headlines, but inspiring someone to believe there's more to people than we often see. So if you've made it this far, consider subscribing to the channel. Stories like these remind us that truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand. And if you want more, click the video on your screen right now. There's another story waiting, and you won't want to miss it.